Well, welcome to the BJCP group. This is kind of behind the curtain. We're starting a few minutes early. I have Jeremy Danner with me right now. Pete's going to join us in just a minute. But Jeremy is the beer ambassador for Boulevard Brewing in Kansas City, Missouri. And Jeremy's going to start telling us a little bit about the Tank 7. I've got one right here. I'm going to try and bring it up on screen with the new beer cam. So we'll see how well that works. So Jeremy, a lot of the folks on this webinar are BJCP beer judges, excuse me, or wannabe BJCP beer judges. And so an important part of our understanding of beer is to kind of get a commercial calibration is kind of what the going term is. So would you unpack a Tank 7 for us and tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. So Tank 7 actually is the base beer for one of our Smokestack Series limited release beers, a beer called Saison Brett, which I believe is our best beer. I always say that's not an opinion, that's a fact. But we had a batch of Saison Brett sitting in Tank 7, waiting to be transferred down the road to an offsite bottling facility that we call 3030, because that's the address. And we were tasting the beer, out of the tank during fermentation, tasting at the end of fermentation as we do, and we discovered the beer was quite good on its own before it had been inoculated with Brettanomyces and before it had gotten kind of earthy and funky. So the idea was we would take some of this beer, we kegged it off by hand, took it to a beer fest called KC Beer Fest, and we started pouring it as a dry hop Saison. Word spread throughout the fest that fortunately, Boulevard had this really great dry hop Saison that everyone needed to try. And people were asking us, well, it's great. What are you calling it? And at that point, that's where the difference between marketing and brewers is clear. We said, well, it came from Tank 7, so we're going to call it Tank 7. And that's sort of how the beer was born, just by this clandestine effort in taking it to a festival. Well, it came back to the brewery, and sales and marketing and leadership had heard what we'd done, and they really liked it. They liked the way the beer tasted before it had become Saison Brett. And we went to work creating a brand for the beer. And our marketing team at the time, and now that I'm on the marketing team, I can drag marketing a little bit. The proposed name was the Poet of the Plains, and a fit. We felt this beer had a name. Its name was Tank 7. So we sort of we held a meeting with marketing and brewers and some leadership from the brewery, and we really stood up and fought for the name Tank 7. And thankfully they agreed, because I can't imagine calling this beer anything but Tank 7. So as you mentioned, Doug, stylistically speaking, it is a Saison. I think if pressed, I would say it's more of a super Saison. I don't know if Imperial Saison is something that exists, but this is certainly higher ABV than your traditional Saison is. It's 8.5. Bitterness-wise, I feel like it's in line with Stile. It's 38 IBUs. But I think the late and dry hopping with Amarillo, there's Calypso, Lemon Drop, and Citra in the dry hop as well, is decidedly non-Belgian. It's not as earthy or herbal as some of those beers might be, but it's sort of become the standard for kind of the American Saison. So much so, in fact, that we're stepping away from calling it farmhouse ale on the label. We're going to call it American Saison. Back in it was been 2009, we were working on branding this beer, with the 10th year this year. We had just retired a beer called Saison from our Smokestack series. So we were a little nervous about saying Tank 7 was a Saison, given sort of the lack of success with a beer called Saison. So we stepped away from that, called it a farmhouse ale, because we felt that, farmhouse ale includes Saison and Bière de Garde and Wit. We still felt good about that. So for me, this beer it's a very simple recipe. We're using our pale malt. It's 97.4% of the malt bill. Malted wheat is 2.6%. We're getting a little bit of gravity from an addition of dextrose midway through the boil, allowing us to get, boost the ABV without adding body to the final beer. And then we're bittering it with Bravo. And then at the end of the boil, it's Cascade and Amarillo. And then we ferment this. Actually, we're not using a straight Saison yeast. We're using our Belgian yeast strain that I always tell people to get Y yeast 3787 or a high gravity Trappist strain if you're attempting to reproduce Tank 7. We start fermentation at 19 and let it rise to 21. Once we reach 7 Plato, we temp up to 23 and let it ride out, finishing at around 2.2 Plato is our final gravity. For me, and feel free to jump in, I know I'm talking a lot, but for me, Tank 7 sort of represents an expression of bright, fruity Belgian esters and phenols. I get a lot of bubblegum and clove. I get some banana, and then combined with the notes we get from the late hopping and the dry hopping, I get a lot of citrus, a lot of grapefruit, obviously from Amarillo. So I get almost like a juicy fruit character from that bubblegum and clove, and then that really citrusy dry hop character. And then we get a touch of black pepper from our Belgian yeast strain. We've got to take a break and drink a little bit. Hey, there's Pete. What up, Pete? But yeah, I think this beer is really interesting because it is so simple as far as the recipe goes, yet it comes out so complex. I think the beer presents a little sweet, even though it finishes fairly dry due to the high alcohol and the fact that the hops are so fruity and citrusy and our yeast is so fruity. But it's interesting. Tank 7 has grown to become our number 2 seller by volume, which is crazy. That this 8.5% dry hop Saison is now the number 2 beer for Boulevard Brewing Company. It's just behind unfiltered wheat beer and just ahead of our first beer we ever brewed, Pale Ale.
So yeah, I am amazed how smooth it is, and the alcohol really sneaks up on you. I mean, it's
frightening.
It's a real 8% beer.
Yeah, it's 8.5. We always tell people that everyone has a Tank 7 story from the first time they drink it without realizing how high the ABV is. It's easy to kind of get a little far down the road without realizing what's happening until it's happened. So we always tell people, we refer to smokestack beers as destination beers, and that you want to be at your destination when you begin drinking them.
Okay, so I guess I'm going to have to ask one more question. And then at the bottom of the hour, we're going live. And frankly, that'll be all over. We're on Facebook, Periscope, and YouTube Live. So at the bottom of the hour, we'll go there. Well, I'll tell you what, before we go there, and one of my questions is, but we'll hold it, is, sure, that alcohol is just amazing. I mean, how do you do that as a brewer? So that's my question, but why don't you hold it?
Sure.
And then we'll at the bottom of the hour jump into it. Pete, we're glad to have you here.
Hey, everybody.
So everything good on your end? You rolling?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, like I said, at the bottom of the hour, we will get things started. I'm going to look at my little script right quick so I do that smoothly or as best I can. And then we'll get rolling. And it looks like we got better than a dozen people. And maybe while I'm doing that, you guys might tap in the chat a little bit and let everybody know kind of what we're doing here. And so I think I'm going to minimize our beer there. Okay. So we're going live, gentlemen. Welcome to the January BJCP Study Group webinar. I'm your host, Doug Piper, and I appreciate you allowing me to join you as we all grow our judging skills. I really appreciate your time. My background is I'm a certified Cicerone and a BJCP beer judge working on advanced rank. And these study groups and the webinars are a way for me to share what I'm learning on my beer journey. But today we're going to do something a little different. On the webinars so far, and we've done about a half dozen of those, they've been highly technical. The water webinar was amazingly technical with John Palmer. Today we're going to have a little bit of fun. Yeah, and Pete just held up the fun. I'll bring back up the beer cam. We're going to start out with a Tank 7, and let's see if I can bring that up on the screen successfully. The beer cam, the new beer cam. So we're going to be discussing Tank 7 from Boulevard Brewery's brewery ambassador, Jeremy Danner. Jeremy's also going to tell us about the 30th anniversary of the brewery coming up. And then Pete Dulin, the Kansas City beer author and travel expert, he's going to be telling us about the Kansas City craft beer scene, just kind of in general. But before we move into the webinar and the introductions, I do have a couple of housekeeping items I'd like to kind of go through. The items are, first of all, this is not official BJCP material. This is something I'm doing on my own and providing to you and the folks who want to come along with me on the journey to learn about this. So we're not official BJCP. If your webinar is not playing smoothly, which it does happen sometimes, in the upper left corner, or I guess it's pointing this way on your screen, hit the refresh screen or the F5 if you're on a Windows computer or on a Chrome computer. Many times that will fix it. Also, before you panic, make sure the mute button is not on with your computer and you might not be able to hear. Down at the bottom here, we've got some nice features in this program. There is, first of all, a link there that you can sign up for the upcoming John Mallett webinar. Right in the center is an Ask a Question, and looks like we've got one so far. In the second half of the webinar, we're going to go through all those questions. So Pete will stay here through the webinar. Jeremy's staying here through the webinar. So if you got tough questions for those guys, you can make them squirm a little bit. Just to the right of that, or at least on my computer, you'll see polls. We're going to be looking at those polls and to kind of understand our audience just a little bit better. And on the left here, there is the chat screen. And I would encourage you to use the chat screen. Please don't use it to put in any questions because we might not see it. We're going to look at that Ask a Question box right there to go through the questions. So also, if you see me looking around, no, this is a one-man show. So I'm moving cameras and pointing buttons and changing things. I'm not checking my Facebook feed and I'm not doing my email. And I'm not bored, I promise you. So with all of that, the last thing I like to mention is this is a self-supported initiative. And I would just encourage you, if you enjoy these webinars, there'll be links that I'll send out in the email. We could use your contribution to offset the expenses. And while Pete and Jeremy volunteer their time just as I do, there are expenses for the platform. And so if you can offset that, that would be fantastic. And at the very end, everyone will get a email with all the registration for the recordings, the slides, and everything else. So with all of that, we're going to get into the introductions of everybody. And the first guy we want to get to is Pete Dulin. And let me see if I can bring everybody up on screen successfully. There we go. And the beer cam is off.
All right. Hey, everybody.
Welcome, Pete Dulin. Pete Dulin is the author of 4 books, including the travel guidebook, Expedition of Thirst, exploring breweries, wineries, and distilleries across the heart of Kansas and Missouri. Other books include Kansas City Beer, A History of Brewing in the Heartland, KC Ale Trail, and The Last Bite, 100 Simple Recipes from Kansas City's Beer Chiefs and Cooks. In addition, we have Jeremy Danner. Jeremy is the ambassador brewery of Boulevard Brewing. And so while Jeremy doesn't write books, he makes some darn good beer. And so, Jeremy, we've been talking about the Tank 7, and we'll bring the beer can back up on screen. Can you unpack a little bit more with some details about the Tank 7 so we can understand the ingredients? My question about the alcohol, because, oh, that's dangerously nice.
Yeah. So Tank 7 is it's a dry hop saison that we brew. It started out as the base beer for a limited release beer we make called Saison Brett. And we discovered this beer was quite good on its own before we'd added Brettanomyces to it. So the recipe itself, it's quite simple. We're using pale malt and a touch of malted wheat. We add a little bit of dextrose during the boil to boost the gravity to give us some more alcohol without adding any body or sweetness to the beer. And then we're primarily hopping it late with Amarillo is sort of the impact of the feature hop. We're using some Cascade, and then dry hopping, we're using a blend of Amarillo, Calypso, Lemon Drop, and Citra to create Tank 7. We're dry hopping just once during fermentation. It's not a DDH Saison. I know DDH or TDH is, everyone's talking about that these days, but the idea is to create sort of our American take on a Belgian-style Saison. So our brewmaster, Stephen Powles, is Flemish. Say it's fair that he knows a bit about Saisons and Belgian brewing. And what he wanted to do in creating Saison Brett was to make a saison that featured really strong citrus character in the hops, and then add a really healthy dose of earthy funk in the form of Brettanomyces. But as luck had it, we sort of fell in love with Tank 7 as it was, and developed that into a year-round smokestack series beer that really just sort of blew up for us in a way that no one at the brewery thought was going to happen, I think.
So, Jeremy, you threw around an acronym that I don't recognize. DTH?
Oh, DDH. No, double
DDH.
dry hop. Yeah. So whenever we're talking about our dry hop beers, and everyone, is it double dry hopped? And what's funny is we've been double dry hopping our IPAs for a long time, doing a dry hop in the middle of fermentation and a dry hop at the end, and it just became a big deal. Sort of the same way, I think it was, is it Stone that was talking about hop bursting? And we're all like, you mean late hopping? So it's interesting to see what processes that are fairly standard become kind of these buzzworthy marketing terms. But Tank 7 and Saison Brett just get one dry hopping.
So what fermentation temperature do you go with?
We start at, so everything I talk about is going to be in metric. So we start at 19C, and then we let it rise to 21C. And then once we reach 7 degrees Plato, we temp up to 23C for the remainder of fermentation. And we finish out around 2.2 Plato, so fairly dry. But because the beer does have a fairly decent alcohol level, 8.5, I think you do get a touch of sweetness from that ethanol, and then you do get some sweetness and some fruity character from the hops that makes people feel like this beer is a little bit sweeter than it actually is.
Well, it is an awesome beer. And I have to admit, this is the first time I've had it. And while it is available here, it wasn't until Pete Dulin was telling me about it that we should really give it a try. And then as I examined it more, found out it was one of the BJCP standard examples for saisons. So,
yeah, it's funny. I knew that, and we actually, I was going to say sometimes they let me, but sometimes I get to respond to messages that we receive from our website. And we had a guy, I can't remember where he was, and if I remembered, I wouldn't say it because I don't want to out him, but he wrote in saying that Tank 7 was a terrible saison, and that we should really look at the BJCP style guidelines next time we think about brewing a saison. So I told him that most pro brewers, we don't necessarily look at style guidelines when creating a beer. You know, we think about flavors and how we'd like the beer to taste, and then if we have a beer that's in the middle of a couple styles, or we're not sure what to call it, we might consult guidelines to kind of figure out how to tell people what to expect in the beer. But in looking at that, I noticed that Tank 7 was listed as one of the best commercial examples of the style. So I said, next time you cite the style guidelines, you might read all the way to the bottom, and you'll note that Tank 7 is listed. And his reply back was a much different tone than the original message he sent.
So, Jeremy, how would you unpack it? Can you give me some of the flavor attributes when you taste it and when you smell it? What are some things that should come to mind?
I mean, for me, I get a ton of grapefruit and citrus and kind of like orange pith character, kind of a marmalade character from the hops combining with the sweetness of the alcohol. I get a lot of bubblegum and clove, 4VG from our Belgian yeast strain. When we mash in lower, we do get a pretty good 4VG character in our beers with the Belgian yeast strain. And then I get a touch of black pepper, that you kind of get with Belgian yeast. And then for me, it's really all about that dry hopping sort of takes over. It's not super hoppy, but I think because of the American hops, it does present a little hoppier than most saisons.
How would you describe the malt?
I mean, for me, the malt is there's a slight sweetness to it, like a honey sweetness to it, but it's really bready, cracker-like malt sweetness. Just a touch. The idea is to have a little bit of that malt sweetness to balance out the 38 IBUs we're getting, but really we want the malt to kind of get out of the way and showcase the Belgian yeast character and the aromatics we're getting from the hops.
So are there any other styles of this particular Tank 7 that are saisons that are also great examples and other good beers to try?
I mean, that we make, or other saisons that I'd recommend? I'm sorry.
I was thinking that Boulevard has in particular.
Yeah, I mean, Saison Brett, I always tell people that's the best beer that we make. And when I say that, I mention that that's not my opinion, that I feel that's a fact. It's sort of Tank 7 that we inoculate with Brettanomyces. So when we release Saison Brett, we'll typically package it in late January, early February. We'll inoculate with Brettanomyces bruxellensis, and we also bottle condition with Lalaman's DV10, and we'll let it sit in the warehouse until we get. We're looking 21 days is typically what we get on bottle conditioning for our 750s. They're 100% bottle carbonated, going in maybe 1.5 2 grams per liter CO2, and targeting upwards of 7.5 8 grams per liter at the end. And then once we get that CO2, then we start tasting and analyzing with the GC to see when the Brett character comes on. So as you know, Brettanomyces can reduce esters and create phenols in that secondary fermentation. So once we start seeing the esters drop a little bit, we're measuring this with a gas chromatograph. Once we see that ester profile start to drop and we see the phenols come on, then we start tasting the beer in our panel to make sure that it's bready enough to be released. And it's usually 2.5 3 months before we feel the Brett characters where we'd like it to be. And then obviously, if you hold on to the kegs or the bottles, the Brett character will increase with time.
Pete, maybe you've got some questions on the Tank 7. I think I've done all the question asking.
Well, I don't know that I have questions per se. I thought I would chat a little bit about the beer and how it pairs well with food.
Sure.
Please.
Yeah. So it's, as Jeremy said, it's got a lot of great citrus character to it, a really big aromatic nose, citrus and some fruit. So as far as foods that I would pair, cheeses, like really rich, like triple cream cheese, maybe a brie or camembert, something nice and bloomy. I think holds up well to the beer. Also, I think a nice diverse like charcuterie platter where you've got some variety of cheeses and some rich prosciutto or salami will also hold up well to the beer.
That's what the beer cam is missing.
Yeah. There you go.
That's what we're missing. I knew there was something missing.
Yeah, sounds really good. I'm hungry right now. Yeah. If you wanted to like have the beer with a more substantial meal, then maybe a roast chicken with like an apricot glaze, or for something lighter, like in warmer weather, maybe a peach and arugula salad, where you've got some peppery notes from the arugula that would pair up well with the hints of black pepper in the beer. Another idea, like just for an appetizer, might be crostini with a nice tangy goat cheese and like a mango chutney, something fruity or like a little bit of citrus in there. So, Jeremy, does any of that sound appealing to you?
It all sounds great. I think Tank 7 is it's unfair when it comes to food pairing, because I think a good Saison is one of the most versatile beers to pair with food. We've actually, this is a shameless plug for something we're doing. We have a series called 7 over 7 where we sit down with chefs around the country, sort of people that I've come across in my travels. Part of my role is traveling to markets and going to dinners and tastings and festivals and events, or if we launch a new market, I'll go hang out. But we've been sitting down with chefs over a glass of Tank 7 and asking them, we're liars, we actually ask 10 or 11 questions and then edit it down to the best 7 answers. But one of the things we ask is, what do you want to pair with Tank 7? And we've gotten a ridiculous variety of answers, covering everything you talked to, from, fancy food all the way down to burgers. I was at a beer dinner a couple of years ago with Stephen Powell's, our brewmaster, and I was speaking about the pairings, and I sat down and he said, man, this pairing with Tank 7 is really good, but to be fair, you could pair this with hot dog water and I'd be pretty happy. So I was like, well, thank you, but I think it speaks to how great this beer is. I think the effervescent carbonation certainly plays a role in that, and some of our higher end, higher ABV Belgian style beers or our Smokestack series beers do feature a little bit more fluffy, airy carbonation. I think that's ideal for pairing with food. You scrub your palate so that you get a fresh bite, after each swig of the beer, you go back to the food and can sort of taste everything fresh again. And I think having a fluffy beer with food really makes everything easier to enjoy.
Yeah, it really is a very versatile beer. Great to enjoy by itself, but also fantastic to pair with a wide variety of foods. Like you can go upscale, or just like a burger and like some truffle fries with this beer. It's fantastic as well.
Well, I got to give credit to the persistence. This thing's been open now over 20 minutes, and while it's thinned out, it still looks and tastes mighty good.
We know a little bit about foam, yeah.
I would say so. Well, Jeremy, one of the other questions that I wanted to move into is you've got a birthday party coming up for Boulevard, don't you?
We do, yeah. So we'll turn 30 this year, and we celebrate our anniversary on November 17th. That's the anniversary of the day that John McDonald, our founder, sold the first keg of Boulevard beer. So in the early days of the brewery, John was everything. He was the head brewer, he was the cellarman, he was the packaging operator, he was the sales guy. So on November 17th, 1989, John McDonald loaded a half barrel of pale ale in the back of a beat-up pickup truck and drove it down Southwest Boulevard, which is where we're located, right up to the state line, and just started asking bars if any of them wanted to bring on a keg of this new beer. And the first place that bought was a Mexican joint called Ponax, and they bought the first keg of pale ale, and John wheeled it in by hand and tapped it and poured the first beer that day. We actually reenacted it on the 21st anniversary of that event a few years ago. We had John drive a keg of pale ale down the street, wheel it in by hand, and tap it behind the bar. But yeah, in those days, people wouldn't try it. John would take pale ale out to a bar, and he'd sit it on the bar and say, "This is the beer I'm making. It's pale ale. Hope you give it a try." And people would push it back across the bar, saying that they didn't want to drink beer you couldn't see through. And look where we are today. It's amazing how much has changed in those times as far as people's willingness to try new things. I mean, if you're at a bar right now and somebody hands you a beer, you're going to try it. You're going to try every beer they want to offer you. And then, speaking of clarity, if you look at what's happening in IPA right now, it's through your beer. So it's interesting how much has changed in those times, not only in Kansas City, but in beer in general.
So what's going to happen for the 30th birthday party?
Well, we're working on throwing a party, and I'm not in those meetings. I'm not a decision maker, which is awesome. I have influence, but no authority. So I know we're working on a party, and then we're working on a cool beer to celebrate that 30th anniversary. And then we have some other plans that I'm not at liberty to talk about just yet, but we have some really cool stuff going on.
All right. Well,
go ahead, Pete. Jump in for a second. Talk about John McDonald, as Jeremy mentioned, he founded the brewery, and the beer that he developed, pale ale, putting something out there like that at the time in 1989, early 90s, was very risky. Now we're at a time when the country has more breweries than ever. But in 1989, like craft beer or microbrewed beer, as it was known then, wasn't as common. You had these mass market beers, the brands that everybody's familiar with, that were predominant in bars and restaurants. So there was no guarantee that a brewery, making a pale ale like this that was really hoppy for its time would be a success. So it was a big risk that he took.
It is, and what's crazy to add on to that is when John started Boulevard, he bought a 35-barrel brew house and 70-barrel tanks. So he was making double batches of pale ale at a time when people said you'll never sell beer people can't see through, and wouldn't even try. But yeah, to Pete's point, like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale was probably the original extreme beer. It was so bitter, and there was so much going on in that beer that it freaked people out. So it blows my mind looking back that John went that big in 1989. When you have people opening breweries now that people have heard of, they've come from breweries, they have a great reputation, and they still open up with a 5 to 7 barrel brew house. So John was really looking ahead, and it's interesting to note that 35 barrel brew house took Boulevard all the way until 2006. So up until 2006, every drop of beer that Boulevard made came from a 35 barrel brew house. We're brewing over 100,000 barrels a year on that 35 barrel brew house, which is absolutely insane.
Wow. Well, let's take a little break and look at our polls. Pete, help me with the polls here, and let's go through these a little bit. So 1 second, I'll move this screen around. All right, so what Boulevard Brewing beer have you tried? And it looks like the majority of people, 56%, have tried the Smokestack Series Tank 7. The next one, when did your first Looks like I wrote that rather poorly. When did you first begin drinking American craft beer? And the vast majority of the people, 73%, is the third wave, the 21st century boom, roughly starting in 2010. Besides good beer quality, what's the most important thing at a brew hall or tap room? And so far, the leading votes is a variety of beer styles, true to style, and that just got bumped up once more as we speak. And does diversity, age, race, gender, sexual identity in craft brewing matter? And the vast majority, 67%, say yes. Diversity in craft brewing expands perspectives, ideas, and approaches. And the last question in the poll, and again, we'd like to get everybody's input. We'll look at these again, is what type of brewery would you most likely visit in Kansas City? And by far, the Basics leads with 67%. Whatever brewery is closest with solid beers, fun atmosphere, and good service. So I think that's a good segue to you, Pete Dulin. You kind of wrote the book on beer, wrote the beer on book too, in Kansas City. So what can you tell us about maybe an experience at Boulevard if you go and visit the brewery as a writer? What should we expect? I'm from out of town. I'm from Greenville, South Carolina. So what if I drove up to over to Boulevard? What would I see there?
Well, first of all, I definitely welcome you and everyone else from out of town to come to the brewery and check out the beer hall. It was open about a year ago. Is that right, Jeremy?
I feel like we just crossed 2 years. So we opened around July 3rd or 4th a couple of years ago. So a little bit over 2 years. It's tough for me to remember though, because I've been at Boulevard 11 years now. So things that happened before I started are so far ago, and things that happened recently happened 6 weeks ago. It's tough. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, but it's still relatively new, and it's a fantastic experience. When I was doing my research for my book, Expedition of Thirst, I visited a lot of breweries throughout Kansas City and the surrounding area. And so I got to see a lot of tap rooms and brewery experiences. And Boulevard's taken something that's at a whole different level. They previously had their tasting room within a separate building. And then about a little over 2 years ago, they acquired this other building adjacent to the brewery and built this brew hall that has, I believe it's 4 stories. And it encompasses this, you can do a self-guided tour of some exhibits on the first floor. Then there's a guided tour that the brewery offers that's worth taking. It's very educational and fun. You get to see a lot of different aspects of the brewery itself. And then probably the most fun part is the beer hall itself, which is the next floor up. And it's where you can get a complete Boulevard Brewing beer experience. They've got, probably 2 dozen or more beers on tap?
Yeah, usually 24 to 30 different Boulevard beers on tap at a time.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's a wide range of styles. So you can, if you like craft beer or you're just even getting into it and you want to explore, there's a wide variety of styles. You can do flights or just go and try individual beers and find something that appeals to you. So it's a great place to hang out. To me, it's definitely a tourist attraction, but it's also like a showcase for the city. Compared to brew halls that I've seen in other cities, this one was really done well. It was great planning and forethought, and it's a really great showcase, not only for craft brewing in Kansas City, but for Kansas City itself.
I agree.
All right. And I think it's a place not only that tourists come to, but it's a fun place for people that live here in Kansas City just to hang out, to meet up with friends or family, or you just have a few minutes and want to hang out in the beer hall. It's got a great scenic view of the downtown area. And again, if you got time, to grab a beer, and they even offer a little food too. So it's a fun place to hang out. So encourage people to come and check it out.
Yeah, one of the things I dig about what we're doing there is I think no doubt we are a large craft brewery. We have a lot of beers that are on the market at a given time that you can find everywhere in Kansas City, but at the same time you can drop by the beer hall, and using that 35 barrel system, we have some smaller tanks that are 35 barrels in size, and then some smaller 7 and 10 barrel tanks that we're able to do some variants or treatments of certain beers on. So you'll see, limited runs of beers that we might be working on developing or that we might be playing around with that you might only find at the beer hall. And it can kind of give you a bit of an inside track to what we're working on for the next year. We, contrary to what folks believe, we don't just always throw something together, although sometimes we do. But for the most part, we're trying to get as far out as we can on developing new beers and having beers be brewed several times within our facility before it's time to go to market with the new beer. And selfishly, it's good for us to be able to have that too, because people come in and instead of just giving away samples of our test beers, you can buy a pour. And I found that people are more honest when they pay for beer. If you hand me a free beer, I'm pretty happy with it. I like free beer. But you hand me $5 to $7 beer that I may not care for, I'm going to give a little more honest feedback. And then we also see what sells, and what sells internally is usually a pretty good indicator of what's going to be successful once the beer goes to the market as an actual release. So it's been neat for me to see, beers that start as one-offs or start as test batches become, full-scale production beers. I think Flora Obscura Dry Port is a great example of that. We just released a sample pack of IPAs called Boulevard and D IPAs pack. Those were all beers that were born in the beer hall from experimentation that our guests love, and we knew that if they did well in the beer hall, and if Boulevardians like them, that's usually a good indicator. There are times though where as an innovation team we'll get excited about a beer and we really like it and we put it on in the beer hall and no one else likes it. And it's important to have that honest feedback that sort of simulates the real market internally, where we can have a little more control over setting expectations for that beer, and then also talking about that beer to communicate our intent. I think communicating intent is really important when it comes to when it's time to sell beer. I think sometimes you have a beer and you think, I enjoyed that, but I don't know what they were going for. And if we can clearly and accurately execute the intent that was stated, I think that helps you, apart from style guidelines, evaluate whether or not the beer was good. Is it a good execution of intent? I think having control over that experience is valuable in the beer hall as well.
Well, I'm sorry. It looks like I dropped off. We had a technical problem on my end, so I'm glad to be back.
We killed it while you were gone. We did a very good job.
I know. You don't need me. Well,
Jeremy, I wanted
go ahead
to ask a question. Since the brew hall is coming to being 2 years ago, do you feel like Boulevard is rolling out more test and experimental beers since you've got that audience to tap into?
Sure. I mean, not only do we have that audience to tap into, we have a place for the beer to go. Before, when we were just operating out of our smaller tasting room, it would hold 35 comfortably on a Thursday afternoon and 125 rather uncomfortably on a Saturday, and it just wasn't a place that was comfortable to hang out and have a beer. You wouldn't often have more than one, and it wasn't what folks who came from out of town to experience Boulevard deserve. So certainly having a place that holds more people for a more comfortable time, it's great to be able to have that place to put test beer. It allows us to make, like I said, 35 barrels is our pilot system. We don't have to keg 35 barrels, but that's what we have to brew. So having a spot to move through beer, especially if we're excited about it or if we're getting good feedback, is great. At the same time, though, if we have a beer that we don't think is good enough for the beer hall, it doesn't go on. Mistakes always go down the drain. I think it's important to be super honest about what we feel is ready to go from a test batch. I mean, this doesn't mean it has to be completed beer, but if we're not happy with it, it shouldn't go on.
Nice. I just want to give a shout out to the beer that I'm drinking. I didn't have any Tank 7 on hand, but I am drinking Boulevard's Bourbon Barrel Quad. Yuri commented that it's one of his favorite beers as well. It's a really delicious beer. It's also part of the Smokestack series that Tank 7 belongs to as well. and it's a delicious beer. It's a little bit higher in alcohol, though.
Yeah,
But,
I think I need one of those after I lost my internet connection.
yeah, glad to have you back.
Well, you guys were doing great. I didn't know if we wanted to get back to the polls and see what those look like. See if they've changed any, or we want to keep going. All right, so we'll look at the polls just right quick, see if they've changed any. Looks like Smokestack still leads as the favorite. Third Wave still leads. Kind of split now on what makes a good brew hall or tap room between knowledgeable servers and a variety of beer styles. Diversity still leads, was up to 60%, and still breweries that are closest with solid beers leads. So anybody's got any more comments to add? And even most importantly, down here at the Ask a Question, we've got 5 so far. We're going to get into those in just a few minutes. So if you got a question for Pete or Jeremy, please put them down there. So I don't know if you guys got to the next question or where I got cut off. And was there a thought to be finished? Am I interrupting anything?
I think it took us a minute to notice, and then oh no, Doug's gone. What are we going to do?
Yeah, we had practiced everything but that.
We're like, Doug is stoic. He's not moving at all.
Well, one of the things, Pete, I wanted to ask you about was other unique destination breweries. I know Boulevard is fantastic, but I know Jeremy is an advocate as much for Boulevard, but for other breweries. Everything I've seen, interviews and write-ups, you're always talking about other breweries. So, Pete, you're the writer in the group. Where would you go? Where are some other cool places?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of options in Kansas City. So not too far away from Boulevard in the Crossroads area, you've got, I think, 6 breweries now. There's Double Shift Brewing and Border Brewing right next to each other on East 18th Street. So you can literally walk from one to another in a couple of minutes. Just down the road on East 18th is Torn Label Brewing. They've got a great cozy little tap room there and some very adventurous beers. There's Casual Animal Brewing also in the Crossroads area. Opening a little bit later this year is City Barrel Brewing. It's a new brewery that will be part of the Crossroads as well. If you're heading to South Kansas City, I'm a big fan of Martin City Brewing and what they're doing out there. They've got the brewery and a tap room there with a lot of beers that you can just get there. They're producing a wide variety all the time. Plus, they serve pizza there that they make from scratch. It's fantastic. Where else? Oh, BKS Artisan Ales is another brewery. It's in Waldo area, I believe. It's fairly small, but it's in high demand. It's been drawing a big audience and produce some excellent beers there. So it's always in high demand. So there's a lot of different options, and there are breweries opening up in the suburbs as well. Kind of the recent wave of craft brewing started in the urban core of Kansas City, and then just north of the river and North Kansas City. I didn't mention those. There's another destination where you can go to Cinder Block Brewery, Call Sign Brewing, and several others there as well. But last year and this year, you've got a lot of breweries that are opening up in the suburbs as well, in Lee Summit, Blue Springs, Independence. And I think that's kind of an interesting outgrowth of the craft brewing phenomenon, where you have the market for craft beer has grown enough to where people in the suburbs want their own brewery close to home rather than having to drive 20, 30 minutes into the heart of the city. And so I think last year there were 5 or 6 breweries that opened in the suburbs, and there's probably 6 to 8 breweries that are going to open up this year also in outlying areas surrounding Kansas City. So it's a good sign of the appeal and growth of craft brewing here locally.
So looking at our audience tonight, certainly what you pointed out, being close by, is important, but it was also pointed out in the survey, or the largest crowd, a wide variety of two-style beers. So are some of the brewers, if you got a short list, can I put you on the spot for a short list of, a wide selection of two-style beers?
I'm sorry, what was the question again? A wide selection?
Yeah, just a broad selection of beers, but they are on style. They're two-style, brewed to style. They're not just crazy beers.
There's a lot of experimentation with breweries in Kansas City, so I don't know that I would say that any one particular brewery necessarily brewed to style. And so, I think like Cinder Block Brewing in North Kansas City, they produce a lot of great beers, like a porter, and oh shoot, I'm trying to think of.
Well, that was an unfair question. I'm sorry.
One that does come to mind actually is Casey Beer Company. I haven't mentioned yet, and they actually they specialize in German style craft beers. So they're a little bit different from other breweries that may have had an English or like Belgian influence. Casey Beer Company built its reputation brewing beers that are examples of German styles. So, certainly lagers, but Helles, Marzen, and Dunkel is probably their best selling beer. And they try to adhere to that particular style of brewing in Germany, where you don't have a lot of adjuncts to it. Mm-hmm. So I think they're fairly representative of those German styles. But as far as other local breweries, there's not one that jumps to mind where they really stick to the style itself, according to like BJCP standards. Jeremy, if you have any recommendations off the top of your head.
Uh-oh. Jeremy, can't hear you.
I muted myself so I could cough a second ago. Sorry. Yeah, I feel like Brewery Imperial, when they opened with an ESB called Biscuit that I felt was, pretty no frills, just good regular beer. I think they had a Kolschan, and they have a Japanese rice lager. They bought the that Hitachino Nest had, so as kind of an homage to them, they brewed this Japanese rice lager that was really nice. And I feel like the now closed McCoy's, I feel like those guys also executed fairly two-style beers. But I think Pete's right, is that there's not a lot of it's not saying that everybody's making breakfast cereal beers, but there is a good amount of experimentation. It's certainly not a running before they walk sort of thing, as a lot of the beers coming out of Kansas City are pretty good. But apart from us, I think we're sort of 2 or 3 breweries in one, in that we have pale ale and single white IPA and unfiltered wheat beer and bully porter that are very much two-style beers. But then we also make Plaid Habit, and which is a Canadian whiskey barrel-aged imperial brown. We make Chocolate Ale, which is a big amber wheat beer that we put a ton of cocoa nibs in. So I think we sort of play in both arenas, but I think you're pretty right on in that people understand those styles, but there's a lot of improvisation or a lot of experimentation and adding to those styles, as opposed to just straight style guideline stuff.
Well, it sounds like something that's worth a trip, without a doubt. So, Pete, you've given us kind of an idea of the breweries we could go to. How many days would you allow if you came to visit Kansas City? I mean, I know you can't go forever, but 2 or 3 days give you a good taste of the better spots?
I think if you just dedicated your trip to exploring craft breweries, then you could cover most of the breweries in 3 days' time. That wouldn't leave much time for anything else. So if you had a long weekend, you could stretch it out to 4 days. I think that would give you a little bit more time. So we have a lot of great food here too. So there's plenty of places where you can go enjoy some great food along with your beer. Just as an anecdote, a few years back, I actually wrote an article for Riverfront Times in St. Louis, where I was kind of writing about their craft brewing scene there, and my research involved a 3-day trip there. And I think at the time they had probably 30, 35 breweries, and I hit every single one that I could in that 3-day span. And so I was visiting anywhere from 6 to 9 breweries in a given day, which you can only drink so much at each place as you're moving from spot to spot. And I don't recommend it unless you have like a really good game plan. That's a lot of beers to try and travel time as well. So if you were to come to Kansas City, I would suggest, checking with. There's
Pete,
Facebook group.
I can't leave. That was kind of like tough job. I mean, really.
It was a lot of fun. It was a challenge. I did get paid for the assignment, and I would gladly do it again. If you were to come to Kansas City, then I would probably try to concentrate to a couple areas of the city. Like I mentioned before, the Crossroads area, you can easily hit 5 or 6 breweries there, all within a few minutes of each other. And just north of the Missouri River in North Kansas City, they've got 4 to 5 breweries there that are close by. So you can have kind of a high impact visit in a short span of time. Of course, some time to spend at Boulevard and visit the beer hall there. You can also visit the Facebook group, Beer Tasting KC, or BTKC for short. It's a great group with thousands of members, and you can ask for recommendations there, and people point you to their favorites. Or if you happen to be in a certain part of town, not in Kansas City proper, but say you're south or east, then people can point out some of those breweries close to that part of town as well. So.
Oh.
Well, thank you, Pete.
You bet.
I got
it. Well, and I was about to put you on the spot, Jeremy.
Oh, I'm ready.
All right. I just wanted to see if you had any high points you wanted to point out in visiting Kansas City as we kind of wrap up this part and then we move into the questions. We got 6 questions. It
cool.
Looks like.
I mean, Pete alluded to it, but I think definitely don't ignore the KC food scene. There's a lot of great stuff that's not just barbecue, although we have a lot of great barbecue in Kansas City, and I think a lot more barbecue restaurants focusing on serving good beer, which is nice. I feel like as the craft beer scene goes, you no longer have to go to a beer bar to get good beer. You can find pretty good beer anywhere you go, and you're going to find a lot of Kansas City brewed options at the barbecue joints. But I'm a giant fan of the Rieger at 19th and Main. It's one of my favorite restaurants in town. I love Grunauer in the Stockyards district. And then I think really people are surprised by this, but we have a great Mexican restaurant scene in Kansas City, great street tacos everywhere. Boulevard is actually located in a neighborhood called the West Side, and there's a whole strip of fantastic Mexican restaurants that are within walking distance. Not when it's as cold as it is right now, but within walking distance from the brewery to go grab tacos. And so come check out a tour, walk a block or 2, have some tacos, and come back and hit up the beer hall. I could go on and on about places I like to eat, but I'm happy to, if anybody has any questions or recommendations, they can hit me up on Twitter or Facebook or wherever. And if you Google me, you'll find me. Don't image search me, but maybe search for me on Twitter, and I'm happy to connect with you to give you advice on checking out Kansas City and hanging out.
Likewise.
Well,
always,
go ahead.
Hit me up on Facebook or Twitter as well. I am also a food and beverage writer. I've been a freelance writer for about 20 years, so I know quite a few places to go check out. So I'm always happy to give tips on where to go eat and drink.
And Pete, if someone wants to get in touch with you, how's the best way to get in touch with you?
On Twitter, it's just Pete Dulin. On Facebook, you can find me there as well. I'm happy to email me if you want. It's pete.dulin@gmail.com. So I'm pretty easy to find. And then I've got a website, PeteDulin.com, where you can also find out more information about the books that I have too.
And Jeremy, is there anything coming up at the brewery that you've got that you want to mention, and how's the best way anybody can get in touch with you at Boulevard?
Sure, yeah. So we actually announced yesterday our next Brewhouse 1 Series beer is coming out. It's a beer called Good Lovin', and it's the word good and then L'Oven, and it's sort of our first go at a pastry stout. It's an imperial stout that we brewed and added some brown sugar and cinnamon and vanilla and pecan and coconut and cocoa nibs too. So sort of a chocolate pecan coconut pie beer. That beer drops exclusively at the brewery on February 10th. And then on Monday, Tequila Barrel Lime Goza comes out in cans and on draft. And if you want to learn more about Boulevard, boulevard.com is a great place to go. If you go to the beer menu, they've given me an entire section called our Brewers blog where I can kind of talk about whatever I want to. I have access to edit our website, which is frightening, I think. But each time we release a new beer, I'll talk about it there. If there's something in particular I want to talk about the brewery or what's going on in beer, they kind of give me that avenue. But then Twitter.com, Jeremy_Danner is probably the best way to get a hold of me. I love Twitter. I think it's a great networking tool. I'm going to talk a lot about my pit bulls and a lot about baseball in addition to beer. Brian's asking root level access. I don't know what that is, so I must not have that. I can change words and put pictures up though, so that's enough for me. I think I know enough to really mess things up, but I don't know that I have access to really, really mess things up. But yeah, no, I'm happy to answer any questions folks have about Kansas City or Boulevard or anything. Let's talk about life, man.
Beer is life, right?
And that's a perfect segue for the questions. So, well, let me just, we're beyond the top of the hour. I got so wrapped up, I kind of lost sense of time. We appreciate everybody coming. We're going to move into the questions next, but this will be the informal, formal part of our discussion. And now we're going to move into your questions. And if you have not heard one asked yet that you want to ask, type it in the Ask a Question. It's right there at the center of your screen. Hopefully I'm pointing at it. And if you see a question on there, you can actually vote. Everybody gets one vote. And so you can pick a question and that'll prioritize it to the top. So we're going to look at the questions. Looks like the first one is yours, Jeremy. So, hi, Jeremy. Based on your personal experiences, can you share some tips on brewing water?
Yeah, so people ask Stephen Powell's, our brewmaster, this all the time about what we do with water, and it's kind of surprising to folks, but we don't do much. We're fairly fortunate in Kansas City that we have water that tastes good, that has a good mineral profile. So mainly what we do is the city water does come in fairly high pH, 9.5, 10. So we dose with lactic acid, and then for tank 7, we add a little bit of calcium sulfate, the mash, but we really don't do a ton with our water. We're not doing any reverse osmosis. We're not trying to rebuild a ton of water profiles. We're pretty lucky. And yeah, we do use the municipal water supply that's served by the Missouri River. We put it through sand filters to remove any solids or precipitate, and then we put it through an active carbon tank to remove any chlorine or chloramines. We do UV sterilization and then dose with lactic in our hot liquor tank as we're going to the mash tun and for sparging, but we really don't have to do much with our water. We're fairly lucky.
All right, we'll move to our next question. Thank you for that good question. So let's see. And by the way, everybody that asks a question, you'll get an email with a link to exactly where it was asked in the webinar. So the next one is my favorite by far beer ever of all time is the Boulevard Quad. Pete, I think that's what you have.
Yeah, it's the bourbon barrel quad.
But Tank 7 is my Friday or weekend special beer treat. My fiance and I are planning our wedding for this year. We're home brewers who reside in Asheville, and I presume that's Asheville, North Carolina, not too far from me. We are planning on cheering with Boulevard Quad rather than champagne. So I guess that's not a question, but maybe one of you has a comment.
The answer is yes to that question.
Absolutely.
Yes. That's awesome. That's an honor, man. Thank you.
All right. Next one. Has Boulevard experimented with riffs on Tank 7, like using different yeasts, adding fruit, adding spices? I do this all the time when I find a recipe and I like a certain style. This is from Brian Kelsey.
We haven't played with Tank 7 too much. I understand the question, and I think it's a good question. I understand why homebrewers would do it, but I think for us with Tank 7, there's nothing wrong with it. So we hesitate to do too much with it. We have done some, this has been a few years, but we did a batch of Tank 7 that we dry hopped with Sriracha Ace instead of the Amarillo. I think we had that on briefly in our tasting room back in the day. But the thing about a beer like Tank 7 as a commercial brewery is once you have an established beer that's well known, you try not to mess with it, because I think, and I don't use the word brand very often. I say beer a lot. I'm never going to say my favorite brand is this, but once you have brand equity, you have to be careful about messing with that, because say someone comes into the beer hall and we have a variant of Tank 7 on that we've put elderflower or chamomile, or we've done something to it to greatly depart from what Tank 7 is, and someone has it and they go, oh, I don't like Tank 7. I don't care for that beer. And the next time they see it out at a bar or in a liquor store, they might not realize that the Tank 7 doesn't normally have that. So we're very cautious about protecting that beer and not doing too much with it. But we do, we've played around with some different Saisons that are, our base Saison recipe is Tank 7, but then we, do different, trying to the best way to say this. We had like a lower ABV version that we did some peaches with, but we didn't call it Tank 7 with peaches. It was just Test Saison with peach. So we're very careful with that to try not to mess Tank 7 up, I think. So we definitely play with Saisons, and we play with Belgian style Goldens and that sort of family, but we don't really do much where we release a riff or a variant on Tank 7, just because we don't want to confuse anyone. But then at the same time, we don't want to communicate that we think there's something missing from Tank 7, if that makes sense.
That's a great question, though, Brian. I like that. The next one. Any thoughts on drinking Tank 7 fresh with the dry hops versus aging it with the alcohol? That's from Tom Hayish. Hey, Tom.
For me, I always believe in drinking our beer fresh. I think we've done the work. If it is a beer that requires aging, like a bourbon barrel quad or Saison Bread or a sour beer, I feel like we've done the work of aging it for you, so that when you buy the beer, it's ready to drink. But with a beer like Tank 7, I definitely recommend enjoying the beer fresh while those esters are bright, while the dry hopping is bright. We bottle condition all of our beers with the exception of lagers, so they don't oxidize terribly quickly. But Tank 7 is not a beer that I would suggest aging, because all the things that make Tank 7 will fade with time, and I think you'll end up with just kind of an aged version of a Saison.
It's a good question, though, because I would have thought it would have aged fairly well, but you're just saying you're going to lose some of those phenolics.
Yeah, I think, I'm maybe a little more protective of our beer than some might be. I've not had an aged bottle of Tank 7 in a while. I think some Saisons that aren't quite as hop forward or aren't as bright benefit with some age, but there's not any souring bacteria or any wild yeast in Tank 7. It's a clean Saison, so in my opinion, it's best enjoyed fresh. But the cool thing about beer is we all taste things differently.
Thanks, Tom. We've got another one. Let's see, Jeremy. Looks like, Jeremy, you're getting all the questions. Okay. Pete, you must have explained yours really well.
A lot of great inquisitive minds here.
That's right. Jeremy, have you ever barrel aged a tank?
We have, yeah. We a couple years ago, we got in some tequila barrels, and Stephen Powell's our brewmaster, sent around an email to the brewers, and he said, hey, we got in these tequila barrels. Do you guys have any ideas on what we should do? And a couple of us immediately replied saying, hey, let's mess around and make a Goza with some lime and tequila barrel age a lime Goza. And Stephen Powell's our brewmaster said, no, let's age tank 7 to see what happens. It was a beer that we'd brewed before, that we kind of had some known parameters and kind of some experience with tasting that beer as it ages. So we aged tank 7 in some tequila barrels, and really all it did was just ruin some tank 7. It didn't pick up a ton of tequila character, and the beer just kind of oxidized. So we quickly pulled the plug on that project. And then I remember an email coming out where we said, hey, I've got an idea. Let's put a lime goza in these tequila barrels. And me and the other guy are like, it's a great idea. We like that.
So what does work good in a tequila barrel? I don't know that I've had a tequila barrel aged beer.
Well, so yeah, we have tequila barrel lime goza, which returns for the third time.
So gozas work well.
We did that, and we have an imperial stout that we actually aged in some tequila barrels, and it's tough for me because I think tequila is such a bold flavor. You can get kind of some smokiness and a lot of phenolics from that. The comment says you never know until you're trying that. Exactly. We didn't know what was going to happen, and we found out that it wasn't great. But thankfully, we make enough beer that we can play and experiment. And if we have something that we don't like, we do dump. But in my experience, it's not the lighter colored beers that lack acidity that do best. I feel like we played around with imparting tequila character into a triple, and we didn't dig that as much either. So I think for me, like beers that have some more malty character or some acidity to balance out that tequila character, I think are the best, in my opinion.
Great question. Let's move on to our next ones. So I recently heard that Torn Label has used Boulevard's lab to test one of their beers. How often do you see the Kansas City beer community coming together like this?
We try to be as friendly as we can. We're in competition, but we recognize that, we have the advantage. We started a lot longer than a lot of Kansas City breweries did. And at the time that Boulevard, we were the only packaging brewery that you could find on shelves for a long time. You saw some breweries doing some smaller distribution of draft. You saw some package being sold from breweries, but for the most part, when you went to a liquor store, Boulevard was the only Kansas City brewery you could buy in bottles at the time. So we're aware of that fortune. So we try to do what we can to help other people who are just getting started out, who don't have the resources or the equipment that we have. And I know it seems cliche, but I think craft beer people always talk about a rising tide raising all ships, and really that's what we want. We know that not everyone is going to have their first craft beer experience at Boulevard. It might be at Torn Label or KC Beer Co. or Cinderblock, and if they go have a beer that's not great, they might say, oh, I don't like craft beer. This isn't for me. I'm going back to whatever it was I was drinking before. So when we have the chance to help folks out, we try to do that. Yes, we've done some gas chromatography for folks. We've put beer through our spectrophotometer to measure bitterness or color to help people dial in recipes or hop utilization rates. We've had some folks drop by with some problematic beer to put through our tasting panel in a blind tasting. Our panelists are absolutely unflinchingly brutal when it comes to blind tasting. We're not mean, but if there's an issue with the beer, and especially if you bring beer with a known issue to us, we're going to do our best to let you know what we think is going on and try to troubleshoot it. So we try to be kind of the big brother or sister of the beer scene, but without the police state surveillance that's associated with Big Brother. I mean, everyone wants to win. Everyone wants to sell the most beer, but we want to do that in a friendly manner. And also, a lot of people who work at area breweries started at Boulevard or have worked at Boulevard at one time or another. So it very much is a community, and we try to remember that. I think that's something unique to beer, and it's something you always hear brought up with beer, but it really is. It's accurate. That's the way things are. It's cool.
Yeah, but what you're doing is great. I come from the manufacturing industry and did over 40 years in it. Got this color when I was doing it, and that'll tell you what it'll do to you. But it was very competitive. You wouldn't think of bringing in a competitor's product in the building and providing them tests. I mean,
no, it's crazy.
And there's a collaborative spirit with beer that I really am drawn to and appreciate. So that was a great question, Chris. Our next question. go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Real quickly, just to build on what Jeremy said, and the word that you mentioned, Doug, collaboration, I think applies as well. While I don't work in the beer industry itself, having studied and written about it in different ways, I think collaboration is part of the craft brewing community. While there's some competition that happens at the market level, there's a lot of collaboration, especially for newer breweries that are starting up. If they need to troubleshoot, or they're short on supplies, or a delivery doesn't happen, then they can call up another brewery and ask them for help or for guidance. And I found that collaborative spirit is pretty pervasive, not just in Kansas City, but throughout the craft brewing community at large. And Jeremy probably has a lot more insight into that as well.
Well, we've got 5 more questions, Pete. We might want to keep rolling, but I do agree. I think it's a very special thing that this industry has, and I don't know of any others like it, but I can tell you it doesn't exist in manufacturing, or at least not anywhere I worked. Okay, next question. Let's see. Was Tank 7 American Farmhouse Ale inspired by a specific Belgium Saison? And what makes it American? Oh, good question, Olg.
I don't know if there's a specific Saison that we could look back to. I know that Stephen will often cite, as many people do, Saison DuPont as being sort of the Belgian Saison, and growing up in Belgium. Stephen obviously drank a lot of Saisons, but as far as the American side goes, we started calling it that lately because we feel it is higher ABV than your traditional Saison. I mean, it's not in the 4 to 6% range. It's 8.5%, and then the hops we're using are American, and you're definitely getting bright American hop character from this beer. We've entered it at GABF or World Beer Cup or the European Beer Star, and it's always interesting to see, based on who's judging the beer, how it does. Typically, Belgians don't like it because it's too hoppy. The hops are too American, and then American brewers think it could be more hoppy. So it's kind of a weird misfit when you look at it compared to style guidelines. But for us, it sort of represents that intersection of traditional Belgian brewing with American innovation, and our desire, or our reckless want to mess with things and sort of make them our own. And I think the fact that it was born out of Stephen successfully creating this really earthy Belgian Saison, and then sort of being a discovery by the brewers before it became Saison Brett, I think is also pretty American as far as the origin story of the beer goes. It's very much a grassroots brewer-driven beer at Boulevard, kind of American brewers working with our Belgian brewmaster to create sort of this new, interesting take on a fairly classic style.
So essentially, it's the higher alcohol and the hops for the most part.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think like if I were to enter this, if I were to take the labels off and put it in a homebrew competition as a classic Saison, it would get murdered probably. Who knows though?
Yep. You never know. All right. We've got a couple more questions coming in, and then we'll be able to wrap this up. Andrew has a question. How does Boulevard run its tasting panel program, and what recommendations would you make for running one?
So we have a very talented sensory analyst. Her name is Abby Zender, and she actually came from the dairy industry. She was working down in Springfield doing product development and sensory there. And it's interesting that she came from a more analytical background as opposed to a beer background. So I think that makes her ideally suited to be objective when it comes to tasting. But for us, the first thing that we do to train Boulevardians, and all of our tasting panel is internal employees who have been through sensory training. But the first thing we do is teach people what an ideal example of one of our beers should taste like. This is what Tank 7 tastes like. And then once we have that, we start introducing compounds that mimic off flavors, or compounds that indicate a problem with fermentation or sanitation. For skunked beer, we'll actually put it in direct sunlight and just skunk the hell out of it. It's awful. It's one of the worst days you go to when you go to spiked tastings, but you have to experience what those flavors are and how they present. And they go way over the top. When we're having an oxidized beer, it is very oxidized. Or if she spiked it with diacetyl, it is like movie theater popcorn, and it's gross to go there and you dread it. But it's important to know how those compounds smell and taste and feel on your palate. And then once she's established that you have that sense memory and you can recall that, they start dialing back the amount of those compounds in the beer so that you can detect diacetyl that's just above threshold, or it's still so low that most, I say normal people who haven't been forced to drink diacetyl beer wouldn't recognize it. But you create a panel through that, and you really train people to use their palates as instruments. And in getting to know your panel, you know that certain panelists are great at detecting diacetyl. Certain panelists are blind to butyric acid. So you know your panel, and you know when you're presenting beers to them, which order those beers go in, how you should handle that tasting panel. So I mean, there's not a non 30-minute answer to it, but I think that the best thing to do is really know when a beer is what we say true to brand, and this is a perfect glass of pale ale or a perfect glass of unfiltered wheat beer, and then start introducing those off flavors. And I think if you're serious about analyzing the quality of your homebrew or analyzing the quality of your beer at a professional brewery, it's important to know what your beer should taste like, know what common off flavors taste like, and then start dialing them back, and then be very honest with yourself and trust yourself too. There's so many times where you go to a panel and you think, she'll spike you randomly. So you go to a panel and you're like, oh man, I'm getting butyric in this, but our wheat beer doesn't have butyric. There's no way. And you'll talk yourself out of it. And then she'll tell you, yeah, I spiked you. You didn't notice it. Way to go. And you're like, I did notice it, but I talked myself out of it. So yeah, one of the comments is usually just accidentally taste oxidized or diacetyl beer. No one does that on purpose. It's terrible. Yeah, but we do that on purpose to ourselves.
And so, and butyric is absolutely disgusting.
It's terrible. It's terrible.
But so I can't believe there are people insensitive to it. It's phenomenally the worst.
we had a COO who was blind to it, and one day, we had 3 people who were blind to it in tasting panel one day, and he was very, very aware of it. And he came to panel, and in those days we would taste the beer and then turn around and talk about it. And they're like, oh yeah, that wheat beer, C was great. I enjoyed it. And he's like, are you guys messing with me? Is this a joke? And he was absolutely horrified at how bad it was. But we happened to have 3 people who were blind to it. And, I didn't have my son until 2013. So I'd been at the brewery for 5 years before that had happened. And they'd always talk about butyric as baby sick. And I'm like, Who's tasted baby sick? How do you get baby puke in your mouth? But there are 1,000 ways you can get baby puke in your mouth. You have your son, you're like, who's a good boy? And then there are dozens of ways to get baby puke in your mouth. It's frightening. That's the takeaway is baby puke.
Yeah, I was convinced my children were allergic to dry cleaning fluid, because whenever I would get something nicely dry cleaned, they would throw up on it. But I'm just amazed that anybody could be blind to butyric.
It's horrible.
I know it is. Andrew, thank you for taking us down in the gutter a little ways. All right, we've got a couple more questions. Somebody may have to help me with this, but maybe they know, so I'll speak it. Talk about wort with friends. Anybody know anything about that? Brian Kelsley.
Yeah, that's a me question again. Sorry, Pete. So we did a contest last year as part of Brew Your Calling, talk about a beer we make called the Calling IPA, our Imperial IPA in our Smoke Deck series. And we did a wort transformation contest where we made 35 barrels of wort and gave it away to homebrewers over the course of 2 days. And we called it Wort with Friends. It was the branding for the contest was a play on the cell phone game Words with Friends. So we thought we were pretty clever. And we actually, we held a tasting panel, and I think we got back like 115 samples of beer to taste. And we spent about 4 hours one afternoon tasting through all the beers, and what ended up winning was a saison dry hopped with Citra and Chinook that had cucumbers added to it post fermentation. So we took that beer and scaled it up on our 35 barrel system, and we entered that in the GABF Pro-Am competition. And then we took the winner, a guy named Doug Critton, and flew him out to Denver to hang out. And it was my job to hang out with him. And thankfully, Doug was really cool. We had a really good time hanging out in Denver and kind of drinking our way through GABF and pouring his beer at the Pro-Am. We unfortunately did not win a medal for the beer, but it was a really cool experience. And it's fun to see when we scale up a beer from a homebrew recipe, just how much cucumber is required. Or a few years ago we did it and we called it just wort transformation. I think the guy used maybe like 3 oranges and 2 lemons in his beer, and that ended up being like 300 oranges and 200 lemons for us. So we made him bring in friends, and we bought have you seen the Rotato, like this vegetable peeler, an electric vegetable peeler? We bought a handful of those and ran those all day to peel the zest off the fruit. So it's fun to do those scale ups because you realize just how small the homebrew scale is and just how big our scale is. Like I'll send somebody a recipe and they'll be like, "Is 2 ounces of hops right?" And I'm like, I have no idea. The smallest batch I've ever made is 7 barrels. So I see a ramekin of hops and I'm like, I have no idea, man. It's tough to think on that scale.
Oh, that you guys sound like you have a lot of fun there. That's
we try,
what that tells me. So wort with friends. Brian, thank you for asking that question because I think it speaks volumes for Boulevard and Kansas City in general. Let's see. We've got a couple more. This is from Harrison. What recommendations do all 3 of you have for bettering yourself in regards to BJCP and Cicerone? I'll take that one last.
Pete, you want to start?
Sure. I'd say taste a lot of beer. First of all, develop your palate. If you're focusing on a particular style that you're not familiar with, like taste a lot of different representations of that style and compare against each other. Study the guidelines to know what you're kind of measuring it against in terms of your sensory palate, and talk to other people that have more experience as judges and kind of weigh what your first impressions and your palate is compared to what they're looking for, so that you're honing in on the technical aspects of the guidelines. So that's kind of where I would start.
For me, I haven't taken any of the BJCP exams as a professional brewer who's been around. See, I made my first batch of pro beer in 2006, so I'm now. And then I've taken the General Certificate in Brewing for the Institute of Brewing and Distilling. So I think it'd be interesting. I'd have to study a lot to take the test for. I really suck at memorizing style guidelines. The same is true if I were to take the Cicerone exam. I would not do well on the written portion. I feel like the tasting and the demonstration portions I'd be fine at, but I think I would add, to Pete's drink a lot of beer, buy fresh beer, look at code dates on packaging. If people don't code date their beer, don't buy it. I know that might seem controversial, but if they don't respect the beer enough or respect the consumer enough to let you know when that beer was packaged or when the best by date is, I struggle to buy that beer these days. There's so much great beer out there that if there's not a date on the package, it can be kind of dicey. And then Stan Hieronymus gave some great advice the first time I judged homebrew. He told me to judge what's in the glass, not what I thought was in the glass or what I thought had happened, but to judge based on what the stated intent was and what I was actually experiencing. Because it's funny, you'll get notes back from GABF, from professional brewers and people who judge a lot of competitions. And I can't remember which beer it was, but we got back some notes on a beer a few years ago that said way too much Munich malt, and there was not a single kernel of Munich malt in the beer. And that was an example of not judging what was in the glass. And I think if you focus on what you're tasting and experiencing and compare that to the stated style guidelines or to the parameters for that beer, I think that's the best way to taste beer. And then as far as when you're making homebrew and attempting to brew to style, be honest with yourself. I think a lot of times, I've been given beer from homebrewers who want advice, or even commercial brewers who want advice on their beer. And I think you feel bad saying this, but sometimes you want to say, have you tried to objectively taste this beer? Because I think people get too close to the beer, they get too excited about it, that they aren't willing to accept that the beer that they've handed you is pretty bad. And it sucks to be put in that position, but I'm pretty honest. And if I go to a brewery and they don't ask me what I think of their beer, I'm not going to, tell them, hey, I felt like this was oxidized, or this was over bitter, or this was astringent. But if I am asked for my honest opinion, I think the most respect that I can pay someone is to be honest back. So I think being honest with your beer and honest with yourself and not getting too close to it is important. If you really love beer and you really love brewing, you should be able to know when you've made a batch of beer that isn't what you were going for.
I've just recently gone down that journey. So I'm recently a certified Cicerone, and I'm a certified BJCP beer judge, and I'm working on advancing my rank. And I've done it all in just a little over 2 years. And honestly, before I started, about the most exciting beer or craft beer I had was a Yingling. So I've had to learn everything in just a few years. Honestly, what I would recommend is what Pete started with, is doing it with other people and drinking it and drinking small quantities with other people. And the single best thing I did for myself was getting involved with the BJCP organization and judging beers, because you will have experts, or at least people who are more expert than you. They will pair you with a judge. And when you sit across and judge a beer and you hear him evoke all these fascinating aromas, and all you think of is just kind of sweet and beer, frankly, it's a bit of a humbling moment. And it's a great experience, though, because to go through it, you begin to appreciate expanding your palate. But it's in my opinion, it's almost impossible to do by yourself. You need to sit across the table with somebody like Pete or Jeremy or another BJCP judge. Or what I can also recommend, if you're like me in Greenville, South Carolina, there's not too many BJCP people, and so we don't have very many events. So a group has been formed called the BJCP Study Group, and there's a 101 and a 201 group, and you can find them on Facebook. And also I'll send a link out in this webinar. It's not quite the same. No, it's not nearly as good as sitting across the table with someone to expand your palate. But it's the next best thing to it. And there you can ask questions, you can be comfortable. And we have even, I think, 4th level BJCP masters in the group, tons of nationals. There's just a great group of folks there. So I would recommend that, but start just trying to find a BJCP. The Cicerone resources are very good. The books that they have, the guidebooks, the classes they have are fantastic. So, but just get started. But as Pete said, you do have to drink some beer, but don't just, it's not just drinking. You've got to unpack it with somebody, and you need somebody to really help you there.
And just to build on that real quick, in addition to drinking beer, it's so I come from a food writing background, and I would say, just like a wine sommelier would, like, develop your palate, and you can do that through food as well. So, just for example, you might think of like sweetness, and like sweetness isn't a uniform characteristic. You might have like sweetness that you get from like really well cooked bacon versus a sugary dessert, or sweetness that you find in like a roasted sweet potato, and all of those will have different characteristics to it. Or, like cherry, for example, a beer might be described as having cherry in it, but is it more of a tart cherry? Is it more like a cherry that you would find in an old fashioned, or if it's a cherry lime goza, for example, like that might have a different flavor than the cherry that you would find in a darker style of beer. So as you eat and experience flavor in general, pay attention to what those flavors are and kind of build up that mental inventory, so that you can bring that to the beer that you taste, and that will make you better informed and more precise in your comments as you're judging beers.
I think that's a very good point. I've become a much better cook now that I've developed my palate, because so much of it is food related. That is a great question, Harrison. So thank you for asking that. We got a couple more left. One left. Oh, well, we got more than that. Let's see. This question is for Pete. From Jeremy.
Oh man.
Now Jeremy, you're the first person I've ever had do that.
It's a serious question too, Pete.
It's a great question. It is a serious question. There's a lot writing on it. I think you have to define like what is a sandwich. And to me, a sandwich is two separate pieces of bread. It's not bread that's like split in half. So I would say no. A hot dog is a category unto itself, or at the very best, it's a subset of sandwiches. But
correct.
Yeah, that is my answer.
You guys are great. I've done a bunch of these webinars and nobody's done that. And you can tell we cover some serious stuff here. Okay. I think Logan is going to wrap up our questions with his serious ones. As an ambassador brewer or beer writer, so Pete, you're in this one too. You're not off the hook.
Okay.
What is something that you would like BJCP judges to keep in mind when critiquing local craft beers? Oh, good question. Who wants to go first?
Sorry, I'm so amused with myself. Pete, you want to go?
I'm still thinking about my answer.
Okay, I'll go then. I think Tank 7 story in the no, it's going to take more than 2 bottles for sure. I think for me, when I go to a new local brewery or new brewery in general, I think while they are, they opened a business, no one forced them to do this. They willingly, entered into the gig of professionally making beer. I think you have to recognize that everyone's still learning, especially when they're scaling up. If they came from, a homebrew rig and now they scaled up, to 5, 7, 30 barrels, that's a learning curve. When I started at 75th Street Brewery in Waldo making 7 barrels. I went to the power plant in Parkville making, I think, 10 barrels, and then to Boulevard making 150 barrels. And I remember my first day at Boulevard, I stood under a tank with a guy named Sterling Holman, who's now the brewer at Imperial. And I looked up at the tank, a 600 barrel tank of wheat beer that we'd made. My jaw just dropped, and he put his hand on my shoulder. He goes, "It's the same stuff, dude. It's just a little bigger." But that is quite a leap in making that. So I think give people time and give people a chance. I think if you are going to offer a critique, it's important to be specific in that critique. Sometimes people will say, "This beer sucked," and that's not helpful. What sucked about it? Did you feel there were off flavors? Did you feel the beer wasn't what it was intended to be, or strayed from the description that was given? If you can tell a brewer why you don't like a beer or what you feel is wrong with it, I think that's more valuable than just saying something sucks. And then I think it's also important to recognize that personal preference and objective quality are different. There are styles of beer that Boulevard makes that I don't enjoy. But that doesn't mean I can't appreciate them and say, this is a great example of this style of beer. I hate smoked beer. I don't enjoy it. It's weird. I love barbecue. I like mezcal, but I do not like smoky beer. And we made a smoked Bock about a year ago that I hated, but it was great. It was a really damn good beer. but it's not something I would ever drink. So I think being able to recognize that those two are not related. And then the final thing that I would add is not every beer is for you. You know, we make 45 beers at Boulevard, and it's absolutely okay if you don't like one of our beers, because maybe that beer isn't for you. And the best demonstration that I've received in my career at Boulevard was we used to make a beer called Amber Ale. And I feel like this was probably maybe 6 years ago, and I could be wrong, but we were working on the second test batch, and we're using Sapphire hops in the Whirlpool. And I asked Stephen Powles, our brewmaster, if we could put more hops in the Whirlpool, and he said no. And I asked why not, and he looked at me and said, "This beer isn't for you." And that was really eye-opening for me, is that we don't make every beer for me, and we don't make every beer for Doug or for Pete or whoever down the street. So if a brewery has a couple beers that you don't like and a few that you do, it's a pretty good brewery in my opinion. So I think remember that, like, breweries make a wide variety of beers. And if I were to go to a brewery and everyone in that tasting room liked every one of the beers they make, I think that would be an indication that they make pretty boring beer. So I think it's important to play an experiment and recognize that in the same way that you don't like every beer isn't for you.
I think that's a great
Well,
way to
Pete,
sum it up.
I think you can wrap it up then with your answer to this question.
Sure, and this is, in a way, a slightly different way of saying something that Jeremy mentioned. Everyone has an opinion. Not everyone is necessarily a critic. And I kind of approach this from a food background, but I think it applies to beer criticism as well as art or music. Everyone can have an opinion, whether it's I suck or something that's a more elaborate answer. But criticism is necessary, helpful, and valuable if it's informed criticism. So if you're approaching a beer as a judge and you're at the brewery, not necessarily like this is a beer that's been entered to a competition. The way I'm taking this question is, you're out, you're trying this new brewery, and you want to critique the beer. First, you have to understand, the style and know what you're talking about. Because if you don't, then your criticism just doesn't have as much weight. But if you do understand the style and what it's supposed to be, then hopefully you can judge the beer on its merits, what's in the glass. But you might also do a little fact finding. If you have a chance to talk to the brewer, ask, is this something that you're trying to brew to style, or is this something that you're going outside the lines and you're kind of bringing your own thing to it? Because you can judge something that doesn't necessarily adhere to style. That wasn't the brewer's intent. So I think it's important to kind of understand the context of that beer that's being served and what the brewer is trying to do as well. So sometimes it's important to understand the brewer and the context and not just make assumptions and define it based on that. Hopefully that makes sense.
I think it does. And let me thank you guys. This was a lot of fun. Pete, you promised Kansas City would be a blast, and it really was. Jeremy, you pulled a first. I've never had anybody sabotage the questions and be one of the guests. So
I can't help myself.
I'll have to be wary for that one. And so we survived even an internet crash on my end. So and the audience has been great. I think this is the most active chat that there's ever been on any webinar. So I will have to get back to Kansas City. It's been a while since I've been there, so I think that'll be fun. So with it, to you guys, everybody in the audience, thank you for spending a few minutes with Pete, Jeremy, myself. We really value and we appreciate you spending your time with us. These are self-funded webinars, so if you can help offset some expenses, that would be great. Everybody volunteers their time, but there are out-of-pocket expenses. And the webinar will be recorded, and I will send out contact information. I think Jeremy's promised to provide that. Pete has already given his. I will put that in the email so you can contact those guys and ask any further questions. And the main thing I'd let you know is Thursday, we have John Mallett. And John Mallett from Bell's Brewery is going to be speaking to us primarily about the role of malt and yeast in brewing beer. Now, this is a BJCP topic primarily for those interested in passing the BJCP written exam. But it sounds like we got some pretty serious folks out there in the audience. And John Mallett is a blast. He's a lot of fun to talk with. And he's going to start with a calibration beer also. So he's going to start with a Guinness Foreign Extra Stout, which surprised me. I thought Bell's has, I think, 6 BJCP example beers. And John just said, no, he said, you can't get Bell's in absolutely every state. And he said, you've got an international audience. Guinness is more broadly distributed. He said, let's go with a Guinness Foreign Extra Stout. And I'm going to use that to explain a lot of the malt characteristics. So that's Thursday, just like this one. It's free. So sign up. You can click there on the center of the screen. It'll take you to the site. And I'll also send you links to the BJCP study group, which is a free Facebook group. So with that, again, thank you for your time today. I'm Doug Piper. We're part of the BJCP study group. We've had Pete Dulin and Jeremy and Boulevard Brewery. So Jeremy Danner, Pete Dulin, thank you guys.
Thank you, man.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. Good night, everybody.
Cheers.